Welcome to ZOZO Sleepy Stories. We're thrilled to have you here for another cozy tale to spark your imagination. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us keep the bedtime magic alive. Now, grab your blanket, get comfy, and let's dive into tonight's story. Good evening, my dear friend. Come, settle in. Let the weight of the day drift away from your shoulders. Let the noise of the world outside soften into a distant hum. Find that perfect spot in your pillows and allow your breathing to slow, to deepen, in and out. Feel the quiet of the room wrap around you like a warm, familiar blanket. Tonight, we won't be visiting the lands of dragons or enchanted forests you might know. Instead, I want to take you on a journey much farther away, across the shimmering sands of time itself, to a place cradled between two ancient rivers. A land they called Mesopotamia, the land between the waters. Imagine, if you will, a sky not filled with the glow of cities, but painted with a velvet blackness so profound that the stars looked like spilled diamonds. The moon, full and silver, hangs like a lantern, casting a gentle, milky light over everything. It illuminates the towering ziggurats, great stepped pyramids that seem to scratch the belly of the heavens, built by hands that have long since turned to dust. It bathes the fertile crescent in a soft glow, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers whisper secrets to the rustling reeds along their banks. This is the world as it was thousands of years ago. In the heart of this ancient land, in the great city of Uruk, stood a temple more magnificent than any other. It was dedicated to Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, the goddess of love, of beauty, and of the unpredictable chaos of life itself. The temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a city within a city, a bustling hub of commerce, power, and sacred mystery. Its walls were made of sun-baked mud brick, but inlaid with intricate mosaics of colored clay that shimmered like jewels in the moonlight. Within these walls were granaries overflowing with barley, workshops where artisans crafted beautiful statues, and libraries where scribes etched the stories of gods and kings onto wet clay tablets. But the true heart of the temple, its most sacred and secret core, was a garden. It wasn't a garden of simple flowers or herbs. This was Inanna's earthly paradise. Palm trees, heavy with dates, swayed gently in the cool night breeze. Pomegranate trees stood with their branches bowed, offering up their ruby-red fruit. The air itself was thick and sweet with the intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and damask roses. In the center of the garden, a fountain sculpted from alabaster murmured a constant, soothing song as its water danced and caught the silver light of the moon. This garden was the domain of the Nadatu, the sacred priestesses of Inanna. Now, close your eyes and picture one of them. Her name is Ninsun. She is young, perhaps only 16 summers old. Her hair is the color of polished obsidian, woven into an elaborate braid intertwined with ribbons of lapis lazuli blue. Her robe is of the finest bleached linen, so white it seems to drink the moonlight. Around her neck rests a single carnelian bead, a drop of sunset fire against her skin. She wasn't born here, in this place of divine quiet. Like many of the priestesses, she was given to the temple as a child, a sacred offering from her family to ensure a bountiful harvest or the favor of the goddess. Her old life, her family, the laughter of siblings, they are all like a half-remembered dream to her now. The temple is her world. The garden is her home. Ninsun moves through the garden with a grace that is both practiced and natural. Her bare feet make no sound on the cool, mossy stones of the pathways. She is not performing a grand ritual now. Her duties for the day are done. This is her time, a quiet moment of peace between the setting of the sun and the deep slumber of the city. She pauses by the fountain, her fingers trailing in the cool, clear water. She watches the ripples spread outwards, distorting the reflection of the moon into 1,000 shimmering pieces before it becomes whole again. In that reflection, she sees her own face, a face that belongs not to herself, but to the goddess she serves. That is what she has been taught. You are Inanna's reflection on earth, the high priestess would tell them. Your beauty is her beauty. Your life is her life. She walks to a secluded corner of the garden where a single ancient fig tree grows, its branches gnarled and wise like the hands of an old woman. This is her sanctuary within a sanctuary. She settles at its base, leaning her back against the rough, comforting bark. From here, she can see the ziggurat rising above the garden walls, its peak seeming to hold up the moon. She hears the distant sound of a harp being played from one of the temple's upper chambers, a melody that is both melancholic and sweet, a song that speaks of love and longing. This life is a paradox, a beautiful cage. Here, in the garden, she is surrounded by the most exquisite beauty imaginable. She eats the finest foods, wears the most delicate clothes, and is revered by the common people who see her as a vessel of the divine. She is safe from the hardships of the world outside, the famines, the plagues, the wars. But she is also a prisoner. She cannot leave these sacred grounds. She can never marry, never have a family of her own, never know a life that is truly hers. Her purpose is a sacred one, tied to ancient rites of fertility and cosmic balance that she performs without fully understanding. Her life is a ritual, every day a verse in a long, unending hymn to Inanna. As Ninsun sits beneath the fig tree, listening to the night's gentle symphony, the murmur of the fountain, the rustle of leaves, the distant harp, a profound stillness settles over her. She is not thinking of what she has lost or what she will never have. In this moment, she is simply present. She feels the solidness of the earth beneath her, the coolness of the night air on her skin, the ancient, living energy of the garden all around her. The stars watch over her, silent, knowing witnesses. The moon bathes her in its serene, otherworldly light, and as her eyelids begin to feel heavy, she is not just Ninsun, the girl from a forgotten family. She is a part of the quiet, breathing magic of the night. She is a moonbeam, a whisper of wind, a note in the eternal song. And in this sacred garden, under the watchful eyes of her goddess, she slowly, peacefully begins to drift away into the gentle embrace of a dream. The dream that found Ninsun there at the foot of the ancient fig tree was not one of grand visions or divine messages. It was a simple, fleeting thing. She dreamt of water. Not the tame, murmuring water of the alabaster fountain, but the vast, powerful, muddy water of the Euphrates. She dreamt she was a clay vessel, unadorned and empty, resting on the riverbank. The river rose, slowly and gently, and its waters filled her, not with a rush, but with a quiet, patient certainty. The water was cool and carried the scent of wet earth and crushed reeds. It filled her to the brim, and in the dream she felt a sense of completeness, a feeling of purpose being met that was as deep and calm as the river itself. A soft chime, delicate as a cricket's song, roused her from this watery slumber. It was the sound of the small bronze bells the temple acolytes used to mark the final watch of the night. The moon had moved across the sky, its silver light now slanting through the palm fronds at a different angle, creating new and wonderful patterns of shadow on the garden floor. A deeper chill had settled into the air, a reminder that even in this sun-scorched land, the night had its own cool breath. Ninsun rose, her white linen robe now damp with evening dew, and made her way from the embrace of the garden back towards the heart of the temple. She moved through quiet courtyards and down long, open-air corridors. The walls glowed faintly, absorbing and reflecting the moonlight. The only sounds were the soft slap of her own sandals on the stone and the distant, rhythmic chirping of night insects. She was heading to the Gagum, the cloistered residence where the priestesses lived together. It was a large, self-contained building within the temple complex, a place of women, of shared duties, and of quiet companionship. As she passed through its high, arched doorway, the air changed. The sweet, wild scent of the garden was replaced by the warm, comforting aroma of burning cedar incense, of scented lamp oil, and of the clean linen stored in great wooden chests. The main hall of the Gagum was a large, rectangular room with a high ceiling supported by thick, painted columns. Woven reed mats covered the floor, and along the walls were the sleeping pallets of the younger priestesses. In the center of the room, a few low-burning oil lamps cast a warm, flickering orange light, creating shadows that danced like gentle spirits. Most of the other women were already asleep, their slow, even breathing a soft, collective sigh that filled the hall. A few, however, were still awake, sitting on their mats, either talking in hushed tones or, like Ninsun, finding a moment of solitude before sleep. She saw a familiar figure sitting near one of the lamps, her hands busy mending a ceremonial sash. It was Iltani, a priestess many years her senior. Iltani's hair was streaked with silver, and the skin around her eyes crinkled into a map of gentle lines whenever she smiled. She had been here since she was a girl, just like Ninsun, and she held a quiet authority, an aura of peace that the younger priestesses were drawn to. Iltani looked up as Ninsun approached, and her face softened into one of those warm smiles. "The moon called to you late tonight, little one," she whispered, her voice as smooth and worn as a river stone. Ninsun nodded, settling onto her own sleeping mat beside the older woman. "The garden was awake," she replied softly. It felt as though every leaf and every flower petal was listening. Iltani paused her sewing, her gaze becoming distant for a moment. It is often that way before the rains. The earth holds its breath. She looked at Ninsun, her eyes kind and perceptive. "But it is not just the garden that is awake. Your spirit is stirring too. I can see it in your eyes. Do you have questions, child?" Ninsun hesitated. How could she put her formless feelings into words? The strange mix of peace and confinement, of sacred purpose and a life unlived. "Iltani," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you ever wonder about the river? About where it goes after it passes our city?" Iltani set down her needle and thread, giving Ninsun her full attention. "I have not wondered for a very long time," she said kindly, but I remember when I did. I used to imagine it journeyed all the way to the edge of the world and spilled into the great sea of the sky. She reached out and gently touched Ninson's hand. Her skin was cool and dry. We are like this temple, Ninson. The world flows past us, a great river of lives, of births and deaths, of love and of war. Our walls are high, and we stay here, in this sacred place. We do not journey with the river. Instead, we are the wellspring. We are the calm, deep water that nourishes the roots of this land. Our prayers, our rituals, they are the water of life that allows the great river to flow. Her words were simple, but they settled into Ninson's heart like silt settling at the bottom of a quiet pool. The wellspring, the calm, deep water. It reminded her of her dream. She told Iltani about the empty clay vessel and the river filling it. Iltani listened intently, and when Ninson finished, she nodded slowly, a look of deep understanding on her face. That is a beautiful dream, a dream of purpose. The goddess was reminding you that it is not a weakness to be empty. An empty vessel is one that is ready to be filled. Every morning you wake, and you are empty. And every day, through your service, through your song, through your quiet presence in her garden, you are filled with her grace. That is our blessing, child. It is our greatest gift. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while after that, the only sound the soft hiss of the oil lamp. Iltani eventually returned to her mending, and Ninson unfolded her sleeping blanket. The conversation had not answered all the questions that fluttered in her soul, but it had calmed them. It had given them a place to rest. Lying on her pallet, Ninson pulled the soft woolen blanket up to her chin. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows on the high ceiling. She could hear the soft breaths of the sleeping women all around her, a gentle human tide rising and falling in the night. She was one of many, a single drop in a sacred well. The image was a comforting one. She closed her eyes, and the last thing she saw in her mind's eye was not the temple nor the garden, but the image from her dream. The vast, moonlit expanse of the Euphrates, flowing silently, eternally, towards a distant, unknown horizon. And she, a simple vessel on its bank, was waiting peacefully, ready for the water, ready for the deep and dreamless sleep that was now coming to claim her. Sleep, for the priestesses of the Gagum, was not an escape from their world, but a continuation of it. Their dreams were often filled with the symbols of their waking life. The crescent moon, the 8-pointed star of Inanna, the spiraling patterns of a seashell, or the steady flowing waters of the river. And just as their sleep was a gentle tide, so was their waking. There was no jarring alarm, no sudden call to duty. Instead, the first herald of the new day was the light itself. Long before the sun climbed above the horizon, a soft gray luminescence would begin to seep into the great hall, turning the deep shadows of night into softer shades of charcoal. It was a gradual, patient light that seemed to rise from the very stones of the temple. Following the light came the sounds. The first was the cooing of the sacred doves that nested high up in the crevices of the ziggurat, their gentle calls a soft, fluttering greeting to the dawn. Then came the distant, rhythmic sweeping of a broom as a temple servant began their work in the outer courts. A steady, soothing shush, shush, shush that spoke of order and cleanliness. Ninson awoke to this symphony of light and sound. She didn't open her eyes at first, but simply lay on her mat, breathing in the cool morning air and allowing the sounds to wash over her. The air in the hall was different now. The scent of cedar incense had faded, replaced by the cool, clean smell of the morning mist that rolled off the river and a faint, dusty aroma of clay and ancient stone. One by one, the other priestesses began to stir, their movements slow and deliberate, a silent, shared choreography they had all learned over the years. There was no chatter, no bustling. The first hour of the day was a time for quiet reflection, a gentle transition from the world of dreams to the world of duty. Their first task of the day was always the same: the preparation of the morning offering for the goddess. It was not a grand ceremony performed before crowds, but an intimate, sacred act performed by the priestesses alone. They moved from the sleeping hall to the temple kitchens, a series of long, clean rooms with earthen ovens built into the walls and great stone tables for preparing food. The air here was already warm and carried the delicious, nutty scent of roasting barley. Ninson's task for this morning was to grind the flour. She worked alongside two other young women at a large, flat stone quern. Taking handfuls of the roasted barley, they would place it on the stone and use a smaller, smooth handstone to grind it, pushing forward and pulling back in a steady, rocking motion. The work was physical, requiring a strength in the shoulders and arms, but it was also meditative. The rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of stone on stone, the soft crunch of the grain, the slow transformation of hard kernels into a fine, warm, fragrant powder. It was a process as old as civilization itself. As she worked, her mind settled into a state of peaceful focus. She wasn't thinking of yesterday, nor was she anxious about the tasks of tomorrow. Her entire world was reduced to the stone in her hands, the grain beneath it, and the rhythm of her own breathing. This was a different kind of prayer, not one spoken with the lips, but one expressed through labor, through the patient act of creation. They were not just making food. They were transmuting the goddess's bounty, the golden barley from the temple fields, into a substance worthy of being placed on her altar. Beside them, other priestesses were working with equal focus. Iltani, the older woman from the night before, was carefully kneading a dough made from the freshly ground flour, mixing it with water from a sacred well and a generous dollop of rich, amber-colored date honey. Her hands, though old, were deft and sure, folding and pressing the dough with a practiced, loving touch. She hummed a low, ancient tune as she worked, a wordless melody that was as much a part of the recipe as the flour or the honey. Once the dough was ready, it was shaped into small, round cakes, each one stamped with Inanna's 8-pointed star. These were placed onto hot clay trays and slid into the waiting ovens. Soon, a new scent began to fill the kitchen, overwhelming the smell of roasted barley. It was the warm, sweet, intoxicating aroma of baking bread, a smell of home, of nourishment, of life. It was a scent so fundamental, so comforting, that it felt like a blessing in itself. While the bread baked, Ninsun's next task was to prepare the sacred drink. She took a large clay jar and filled it with fresh, creamy milk from the temple's goats. To this, she added a spoonful of honey, stirring it gently with a wooden paddle until it dissolved. Finally, she sprinkled a pinch of finely ground cinnamon on top, creating a small brown star on the surface of the white milk. By the time the sun was a brilliant sliver of orange on the horizon, the offering was ready. The warm, star-stamped honey cakes were arranged beautifully on a platter of beaten silver, and the sweetened milk was poured into a cup of polished obsidian. It was a simple meal, a humble offering, but it was prepared with absolute intention and mindfulness. Carrying the silver platter, Ninsun joined the small procession led by Iltani, who held the obsidian cup. They walked barefoot from the kitchens, through the now sun-drenched courtyards, towards the very heart of the temple complex, the inner sanctum, the dwelling place of the goddess herself. The air was alive now with the waking city, but within the temple walls, a profound peace remained. Their soft footfalls and the quiet dignity of their procession were the only things that moved in the still morning air. They were the wellspring, as Iltani had said, and they were bringing the first life-giving water of the day to the source. Their simple, silent work was done, and now the sacred ceremony could begin. The doors to the inner sanctum were massive, fashioned from a single ancient cedar tree brought down from the distant mountains of Lebanon. They were not locked with bolts or bars, for no mortal would dare enter this place unbidden. Their only guardian was the profound sense of holiness that radiated from within, a pressure in the air that was as tangible as a heavy curtain. As the procession led by Iltani approached, two acolytes waiting in the shadows pressed their shoulders against the giant doors, pushing them inward. They moved with a slow, groaning sound, the sound of an old tree stirring in its sleep, revealing the sacred space within. To step into the sanctum was to leave the world of the sun behind and enter a realm of twilight and incense. The air inside was cool and still, heavy with the scent of offerings made over countless generations. It was the smell of cedarwood smoke, of dried roses, of myrrh, and of something else, something ancient and indescribable, the scent of devotion itself. The only light came from a single tall candelabra where flames burned in cups of scented oil, and from a narrow opening high up in the ceiling, strategically cut to catch the day's very first ray of sun. For now, it was just a faint gray rectangle against the deep darkness of the roof. The priestesses moved forward into the gloom, their bare feet silent on the polished stone floor. The chamber was not large, but it felt immense, its corners lost in shadow. The walls were hung with priceless tapestries woven with scenes from the life of the goddess, her descent into the underworld, her courtship with the shepherd king, her ascent to the heavens. But no one looked at the walls. All eyes, all thoughts, all intentions were focused on what stood at the far end of the chamber, upon a raised dais of black basalt. It was the statue of Inanna. She was carved from the dark, fragrant wood of a cypress tree and stood as tall as a grown woman. But to her followers, she was so much more than wood. She was a living presence, the earthly anchor for the Queen of Heaven. Her gown was a sheath of hammered gold leaf that shimmered and flowed like liquid light in the flickering flames of the lamps. Her large, almond-shaped eyes were made from the most brilliant, star-flecked lapis lazuli, gems mined from the farthest reaches of the known world. Her gaze was not fixed or empty like that of a mere statue. It seemed to hold all the wisdom and sorrow and passion of the ages. It was a gaze that looked not at you, but through you, into the very heart of your soul. Her hair was a cascade of intricately carved waves, and on her head she wore a crown of golden horns, the symbol of her divinity. In her outstretched hands she held her own symbols, a ring and a rod, representing justice and power. Ninsun felt the familiar shiver of awe that always came over her in this place. Her breath caught in her throat. This was the center of her universe. Everything she did, every moment of her life, was in service to this silent, beautiful, terrifying form. She and the other priestesses were the handmaidens, the guardians, the keepers of the flame for this divine being who held the cycles of life and death in her hands. Iltani led them to the foot of the dais. There, an altar of pure white alabaster stood waiting, its surface cool and smooth to the touch. With movements that were slow, reverent, and practiced 1,000 times over, Iltani placed the obsidian cup of milk and honey in the very center of the altar. Then she turned and nodded to Ninsun. Holding the silver platter with both hands, Ninsun stepped forward. Her heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. This was the most important moment of her morning. She knelt before the altar, her eyes cast downward, not daring to meet the lapis lazuli gaze of the goddess directly. She held the platter out, the sweet, warm scent of the honey cakes rising up to her. It was the smell of her own labor, her own devotion. With the utmost care, she slid the platter from her hands onto the altar, placing it just in front of the obsidian cup. She had done this countless times, yet every time it felt like the first. The offering was now complete. Ninsun knelt back, joining the other priestesses who had formed a silent semicircle before the dais. Iltani stepped to the center and began the morning invocation. Her voice, which had been so soft and gentle in the sleeping hall, now took on a different quality. It was low and resonant, a chant that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath them. She did not shout, but the ancient Sumerian words filled the chamber, each syllable vibrating in the still, heavy air. She sang of the goddess's journey through the night sky, of her power to make the barren fields fertile, to make the flocks multiply, to stir the hearts of mortals with love. As she chanted, a miracle of timing and architecture occurred. The faint, gray rectangle in the ceiling began to brighten. A single, pure, golden ray of the newborn sun pierced the darkness of the sanctum. It was a perfect, straight line of light that struck the statue. It first touched the golden horns of her crown, making them blaze with fire. Then it crept slowly downward, illuminating the brilliant blue of her eyes, which for a moment seemed to flash with an inner light. It slid down the smooth planes of her wooden face and bathed her golden gown in a light so intense, so glorious, it was almost hard to look at. The chamber, which had been in shadow, was now filled with a divine radiance. The chanting stopped. A deep, profound silence fell over the room, a silence filled with awe. In this moment, they all felt it. It was the belief, the certainty, that the goddess had accepted their offering. She had consumed not the bread or the milk itself, but its essence, its spirit, the love and devotion with which it was made. She had taken their humble work and transformed it into a blessing that would now flow back out into the world, ensuring that the sun would continue its journey across the sky, that the rivers would continue to flow, and that life would continue for one more day. Ninsun remained kneeling, her head bowed, bathed in the golden light. A feeling of profound peace washed over her, a quiet joy that resonated deep within her soul. Her small part in this cosmic ritual was complete. The vessel was empty again, but it was a clean, peaceful emptiness, ready for whatever else the day might hold. The sun was up. a new day had truly begun. As the golden ray of sunlight broadened and filled the inner sanctum, the magic of the dawn ritual slowly dissolved back into the quiet reverence of a normal day. The priestesses rose, their movements still graceful and unhurried, and filed out of the holy chamber, leaving the goddess to her silent communion with their offering. For them, this was a form of communion as well. The sacred food, having been blessed by the goddess's acceptance, would now be taken back to the Gagum to be shared among the priestesses as their morning meal. To eat this bread, to drink this milk, was to take the divine blessing into their own bodies, strengthening the bond between them and their patroness. The breakfast was a simple, quiet affair. The women sat on their mats in the great hall, which was now filled with the gentle, indirect light of the morning. They broke the sweet honey cakes and sipped the cinnamon-laced milk, the flavors a tangible reminder of the sacred work they had just completed. There was little talk, just the soft sounds of eating and the shared understanding of their communal life. It was a life of cycles, of rituals repeated daily, weekly, and seasonally, a rhythm as predictable and comforting as the rising and setting of the sun. But the temple was not just a place of ceremony. It was the beating heart of the city of Uruk. It was a bank, a library, a courthouse, and a center of commerce. And while priestesses like Ninsun could not leave its walls, their work was deeply interwoven with the life of the city that pulsed just outside. After her meal, Ninsun's duties took her away from the quiet halls of the Gagum and towards another equally important part of the temple complex, the Dubba, the House of Tablets. The House of Tablets was not grand or beautiful like the inner sanctum. It was a practical place, a series of long, dry rooms lined from floor to ceiling with high shelves made of cedar wood. And on these shelves, nestled in neat rows, were thousands upon thousands of clay tablets. Some were as small as Ninsun's palm, others as large and heavy as a paving stone. This was the memory of the city, its soul etched in tiny, wedge-shaped marks called cuneiform. Here were kept the records of every transaction, every law, every royal decree, every harvest, and every prayer. The air in these rooms had a unique, earthy smell, the scent of dry clay, of old wood, and the faint, inky aroma from the pots of dark liquid used to stain some tablets for emphasis. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic scratching of stylus on wet clay. Here, the temple scribes, mostly men but also some highly educated women, sat hunched over their work tables. They were the keepers of knowledge, their patient hands translating the spoken word, the chaos of human affairs, into an ordered, permanent form. It was a quiet, focused, and deeply important task. Ninsun's literacy was a gift, a privilege that set her apart from most people in the world outside. It allowed her to serve the temple in a special capacity. Her task today was not to write, but to assist one of the master scribes, an old man named Zimri, whose eyes were beginning to fail him. Zimri was in charge of cataloging the temple's vast inventory of livestock. He would listen as Ninsun read from older, sometimes damaged tablets, and he would create a new, updated record. She settled on a low stool across the table from him. He pushed a small, damp tablet towards her, its surface covered in rows of tiny, precise markings. Her job was to read a list of goods that had been paid as tribute to the temple from a vassal city to the east. She picked up the tablet. It was cool and slightly heavy in her hands, a piece of the earth given a voice. She began to read, her voice soft and clear in the quiet room. From the governor of Kish, she read, her finger tracing the symbols, 300 ewes of the first quality, 100 lambs, unblemished, 50 rams, strong for breeding. As she spoke, Zimri's stylus began to dance across a fresh tablet of wet clay. Scratch, press, scratch. Each sound was a mark, a piece of information saved from being lost to time. Ninsun continued, her voice a steady, calm murmur. 20 oxen for the plow, their horns without splinter, 10 casks of clarified butter, 30 sacks of the finest wool, washed and combed. The list went on and on. It was a simple inventory, a list of mundane things, and yet, as she read, the words began to paint a picture in her mind. She could almost see the great herds of sheep moving across a dusty plain, their wool thick in the sun. She could smell the rich butter and feel the soft wool. She could imagine the far-off city of Kish, a place she would never see, a place whose people toiled in their fields and pastures to send these gifts to her goddess, to her temple. The world, in all its vastness, was flowing into this quiet, dusty room, channeled through her voice and captured by the old man's patient hand. She read of shipments of cedar wood from the northern mountains, of copper from a distant land called Magan, of carnelian and lapis lazuli brought by merchants who had crossed deserts and seas, the names of foreign kings, the details of trade agreements, the records of stargazers mapping the heavens. All of it passed through her. She was a conduit, a bridge between the world of action and the world of record. She was not in a cage, she thought to herself as she read. Not really. A cage holds you away from the world. But here, in the House of Tablets, the entire world was brought to her. It was a world made of clay and whispers, a world she could hold in the palm of her hand. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its light now streaming through the high windows of the scriptorium, illuminating the motes of dust that danced in the air like tiny golden spirits. And Ninsun continued to read, her calm voice the only thread in a tapestry of silent, focused work, weaving the story of her civilization. One word, one sheep, one precious stone at a time. The afternoon sun in Mesopotamia was a powerful, sleepy thing. It beat down on the outer walls of the city, turning the dusty streets to a shimmering haze and sending most sensible people indoors to rest in the cool shadows. Within the temple complex, a deep quiet descended. The bustling energy of the morning, the merchants in the outer courts, the petitioners seeking judgment, the scribes recording the world's affairs, all of it subsided, like a great beast settling down for a nap. For the priestesses in the Gagum, this was a time for gentler work, for tasks that soothed the mind rather than challenging it. After her hours spent in the House of Tablets, Ninsun's eyes were tired from deciphering the tiny, intricate symbols. Her mind was full of lists and names of faraway places. Now she sought the comfort of a different kind of language, a language spoken not with words, but with color and thread. She made her way to the weaving workshop, a large, airy courtyard in the heart of the priestess's quarters, shaded by a broad linen awning that billowed softly in the occasional breeze. Here, the air was warm and smelled faintly of wool, of the oils used to soften it, and of the various plants used to dye the threads, the sharp, earthy scent of madder for red, the clean smell of indigo for blue, and the faint, hay-like sweetness of saffron for gold. Several large, upright looms stood against one wall, their wooden frames as tall as a person. The rhythmic, gentle thump, clack, thump, clack of the weavers at work was the only sound, a soft, steady heartbeat that seemed to measure the slow passage of the afternoon. Several other women were already there. Some sat on cushions, spinning raw wool into fine thread with clay spindle whorls that danced and twirled like tops. Others, the master weavers, stood before the looms. Ninsun saw Iltani among them, her back straight and her focus complete as her shuttle, a small boat-shaped piece of wood, sailed back and forth through the vertical sea of threads. She was working on a magnificent tapestry, a deep blue hanging meant for the inner sanctum, which would depict the night sky over the ziggurat. Ninsun's task was more humble. She was still learning the craft, and she sat at a smaller loom, practicing her stitches on a simple band of white linen. Her threads were a deep crimson red, the color of a pomegranate seed, and she was attempting to weave a repeating pattern of small geometric rosettes. Her fingers, which had so carefully traced the lines of cuneiform on a clay tablet, now learned a different kind of precision. Guiding the needle, pulling the thread with just the right amount of tension, ensuring each stitch was even and true. It was slow, patient work. There was no way to rush it. Each pass of the shuttle, each line of thread beaten into place with a flat, wooden comb, added only a tiny fraction to the whole. But there was a deep satisfaction in it. Unlike the abstract lists of tribute she had been reading, this was tangible. She could feel the texture of the growing cloth beneath her fingertips. She could see the pattern emerging, a small island of beauty and order created by her own hands. After a while, as the women worked together in comfortable silence, Iltani began to speak. She didn't stop her weaving, and her voice was soft, weaving itself into the rhythmic sounds of the workshop. She was not lecturing or teaching, but simply sharing a story, an old tale that all the priestesses knew but loved to hear again. "They say," Iltani began, her shuttle whispering through the threads, "that in the time before time, the world was plain. The sky was gray, the earth was brown, and the hearts of the first people were colorless. They knew how to hunt and how to build, but they did not know beauty. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, looked down from her celestial throne, and her heart was saddened by this plain, drab world. So she took the heavens themselves as her loom." Ninsun's hands slowed, and she listened, her eyes still on her work but her mind far away. She took the deep blue of the twilight sky for her first thread, Iltani continued, her voice a melodic murmur. She took the brilliant gold of the morning sun for another. She plucked a thread of pure silver from a moonbeam. From a field of poppies, she drew out a thread of the most vibrant red. She spun the green of the river reeds, the white of the clouds, and the shadowy purple of a distant storm into her collection. Then, with a shuttle carved from a fallen star, she began to weave. And as she wove, she sang. She wove the patterns of the stars, the stripes of the gazelle, the intricate design on a turtle's shell, and the blush of a ripe fig. She wove all the colors and all the patterns of the world into a single, magnificent tapestry. When she was finished, she draped it over the world, and for the first time, humanity looked around and saw color. They saw beauty, and their hearts were no longer plain. Iltani fell silent, but the story lingered in the warm air. Ninsun looked down at her own simple loom, at the band of white linen and the crimson thread in her hand. Her small work felt connected, suddenly, to something vast and divine. She was not just weaving a pattern, she was participating in Inanna's original act of creation. She and the women around her, with their spindles and their looms, were the goddess's earthly hands, continuing the sacred work of bringing color and beauty into the world. She looked at the other priestesses. One was humming the old tune Iltani had hummed in the kitchen that morning. Another smiled faintly as she untangled a knot in her thread. They were a sisterhood of creators, a quiet community bound together by these shared, peaceful tasks. The high walls of the Gagum did not feel like a prison in these moments. They felt like a sanctuary, a calm harbor where the ancient, gentle arts of civilization could be practiced and preserved, safe from the harshness of the world outside. The sun sank lower, and the light in the courtyard turned to a soft, liquid gold, and the looms continued their steady, rhythmic song. Thump, clack, thump, clack, the sound of beauty being born, one thread at a time. As the weavers began to put away their spindles and cover their looms with soft cloths for the night, Ninsun felt a familiar pull. The day, with its structured duties and quiet companionship, was ending. Now came the in-between time, the gentle hour of dusk, which belonged neither to the day nor to the night. It was her favorite time, a time for solitude and for breathing. She gave a respectful nod to Iltani, who was gazing at her half-finished tapestry of the night sky, as if seeing the real stars already woven there, and made her way not to the sleeping hall, but upwards. A narrow, winding staircase, its steps worn smooth by the feet of countless priestesses before her, led to the flat rooftops of the Gagum. Stepping out onto the roof was like stepping into another world. The enclosed, intimate spaces of the temple fell away, and suddenly there was only the sky. The great, open, endless sky. The air up here was different, cooler and cleaner, carrying, on its currents, the smell of the vast reed marshes beyond the city and the damp, fertile scent of the river. From this high vantage point, Ninsun could see everything. Below her lay the sprawling complex of the temple, a city within a city, its courtyards and corridors now falling into deep shadow. Beyond the temple walls was the city of Uruk itself, a labyrinth of flat-roofed mud brick houses packed closely together, threaded with narrow, winding lanes. As she watched, the city was slowly beginning to glow from within. In countless homes, families were lighting their small sesame oil lamps, tiny sparks of warm, human light appearing one by one in the gathering twilight. She could hear the sounds of the city preparing for night, the distant, muffled bleating of goats being led into their pens, the faint laughter of children playing a last game in a hidden courtyard, the low murmur of 1,000 conversations blending into a single gentle hum. And wrapping around it all, a dark, shimmering ribbon was the great Euphrates, its waters catching the last fiery colors of the sunset. Ninsun walked to the edge of the roof and sat down, dangling her legs over the parapet. She leaned back against the sun-warmed clay, feeling the heat of the day seep slowly into her back. The western sky was a breathtaking spectacle of color. The brilliant gold of the afternoon had softened into shades of peach and rose, and a deep, bruised purple. It was as if the goddess, the divine weaver from Iltani's story, had spilled her most beautiful dyes across the heavens. This was her time to unravel the day. She thought of the morning ritual, the perfect holy silence of the sanctum as the sunbeam struck the statue. She remembered the cool, solid weight of the clay tablet in her hands, and the whisper of Zimri's stylus, capturing the world in tiny marks. She pictured the crimson thread on her loom, a thin line of color against the plain white linen. It all seemed so separate, so different, yet up here, under the vastness of the sky, she could feel the connections. The offering fed the goddess. The records fed the city. The weaving fed the soul. All were threads, and her life, her service, was the shuttle that moved between them, weaving them together into a single, coherent whole. She felt a profound sense of affection for the city spread out before her. She did not know the people who lived in those thousands of houses. She would never walk their streets or sit by their fires. And yet, she served them. Her prayers, her rituals, her quiet, ordered life within these walls. It was all part of the sacred contract that kept the city safe. The priestesses were the anchor, the still point around which the chaotic world of Uruk revolved. They were the watchers on the wall, not of the city, but of its spirit. As the last sliver of the sun vanished below the horizon, the colors in the sky deepened into a final, glorious blush, and then began to fade into a deep, velvety indigo. And in that indigo, the first star appeared. It was Venus, the evening star, the celestial jewel of Inanna. It didn't twinkle, it blazed, a brilliant, steady point of silver light. Ninsun's heart gave a little flutter, as it always did when she saw it. "Hello, my queen," she thought, the words a silent prayer in her mind. Soon, other, smaller stars began to prick the darkness, appearing one by one, then in clusters, then in their countless glittering multitudes. The sky above Mesopotamia was not an empty blackness. It was a living, shimmering tapestry, the very one Iltani had been weaving on her loom. Ninsun knew some of their names: the celestial sheep, the great heavenly chariot, the scorpion with its fiery tail. The priests, the stargazers, watched them from the highest levels of the ziggurat, charting their movements, seeking to understand the will of the gods written in the heavens. But for Ninsun, here on her quiet rooftop, it was not about science or omens. It was about peace. It was about perspective. Looking at the vast, star-dusted sky, her own life felt very small, and yet not insignificant. She was one small point of light, just like the lamps in the city below, just like the stars in the heavens above. All part of the same immense, beautiful, and mysterious pattern. The gentle night breeze picked up, rustling her linen robes and cooling her skin. The hum of the city softened into a lullaby. Up here, between the sleeping city and the waking stars, Ninsun felt completely, perfectly at peace. She was exactly where she was meant to be. For a long while, Ninsun remained on the rooftop, a silent observer suspended between the earth and the heavens. She watched as the great celestial river, the Milky Way, began to reveal itself, a faint, cloudy band of light stretching across the immense darkness. The night breeze grew cooler, carrying with it the deep, ancient silence of the desert that lay beyond the fertile lands. Finally, when the air began to feel truly cold against her skin, and a yawn, soft and deep, escaped her, she knew it was time. With one last look at the blazing star of her goddess, she rose and made her way back to the winding staircase. Descending from the roof was like diving into a quiet, shadowy sea. The vast openness of the sky was replaced by the comforting enclosure of the temple walls. The corridors of the Gagum were almost entirely dark now, save for a single oil lamp left burning in a high niche here and there, its small flame creating long, soft-edged shadows that seemed to sway and breathe in the stillness. The world had been reduced to these gentle pools of light and the profound quiet between them. Her footsteps, which had been absorbed by the rooftop clay, now echoed faintly on the stone floors, the only sound in the hallway. But as she drew closer to the great sleeping hall, she began to hear the subtle symphony of the temple at night. She heard the faint, ghostly hoot of an owl perched somewhere on the ziggurat. From the garden, the sweet, heavy perfume of the night-blooming jasmine drifted in, a scent so thick you could almost taste it. And then she heard it, a sound of almost heartbreaking beauty. From an unseen chamber, someone was playing a lyre. The notes were soft and sparse, a simple, melancholic melody that seemed to hang in the cool air like threads of silver. It was not a song of celebration or of ritual, but a quiet, personal lament, a song for the stars and the sleeping world. It was a melody that spoke of longing, of memory, and of a peace found in sadness. Ninsun paused in the darkness, listening. She did not know who was playing. Perhaps it was one of the elder priestesses who had trouble sleeping, her fingers finding comfort in the familiar strings. Whoever it was, Ninsun sent a silent blessing to them. The sad, beautiful music was the perfect lullaby for the temple's sleeping soul. She entered the great hall to find it transformed. In the morning, it had been a place of quiet activity. Now it was a sanctuary of deep rest. Most of the lamps had been extinguished. The only light came from the moon, which was now high in the sky, its serene white light pouring through the high, clear-story windows. It painted silvery rectangles on the floor and bathed the sleeping forms of the priestesses in a gentle, ethereal glow. The air was filled with a single, unified sound, the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing. It rose and fell in a gentle, 100-part harmony. The deep, slow breaths of the older women, the lighter, quicker breaths of the girls. It was the sound of life, of trust, of bodies and souls given over to the peace of the night. To Ninsun, it was the most comforting sound in the world. This was the sound of her family, the sound of safety. She moved as silently as a cat through the sleeping forms, her eyes having adjusted to the gloom. She saw Iltani lying on her side, a faint, peaceful smile on her lips, as if her dreams were as beautiful as the tapestries she wove. Ninsun reached her own pallet and began her final rituals of the day. She knelt beside a large ceramic basin of cool water set against the wall. Dipping a linen cloth into it, she gently washed her face, wiping away the dust and fatigue of the day. The water was refreshing, a final, clarifying touch. Then she took the pins from her hair, letting her long, dark braid unravel and cascade down her back. She ran her fingers through it, loosening the strands, feeling the release of tension in her scalp. It was like letting go of the day's last thoughts, the last vestiges of structure and duty. She folded her white day robe with care, placing it at the foot of her mat, and slipped into a simpler, looser sleeping tunic. Each movement was mindful and unhurried, a quiet meditation to prepare the body and the mind for slumber. Finally, she lay down on her reed mat, pulling the soft, familiar wool blanket over her. She turned onto her side, facing the center of the room, and watched the patterns of moonlight on the floor. The distant lyre had fallen silent. The only sound now was the gentle ocean of breathing that filled the hall. She listened to it, letting the rhythm merge with her own. In and out. In and out. It was the rhythm of the tides, of the seasons, of life itself. Her thoughts, which had soared so high on the rooftop, now came to rest. She wasn't thinking of goddesses or of cities or of the vast, starry sky. Her final thoughts were small and simple. The comfort of her blanket, the pleasant coolness of the stone floor beneath her mat, the feeling of her own tired muscles relaxing, letting go, the profound, unshakable feeling of safety, of being one of many, sleeping soundly in the heart of a sacred, protected place. She was a single drop of water, at rest in the bottom of a deep, calm well. And as she closed her eyes, she let herself sink into the darkness, a gentle, welcoming darkness that promised nothing but peace. And so, Ninsun sleeps. She dreams the deep, dreamless sleep of the truly peaceful, her spirit at rest in the heart of Inanna's temple. But dreams are curious things, are they not? They are like rivers. They can flow out of one soul and, after a long journey down the currents of time, can flow into another. Let us follow the river of Ninsun's dream as it travels on, leaving the sun-baked land of Mesopotamia behind. Let us watch it cross vast, wind-swept plains and traverse the highest snow-capped mountains on Earth, until it arrives, thousands of years later, in another ancient land, a world of silk and jade and whispered secrets, a place they called the Middle Kingdom. Our new story begins not in a temple of mud brick, but in a city of sweeping tiled roofs and walls of deep vermilion red. This is the Forbidden City, the heart of the Chinese Empire, a place so vast, so ordered, and so magnificent that it was considered a perfect reflection of the heavens themselves. Here, the Son of Heaven, the Emperor, lived in splendid isolation, his every move, his every breath, governed by 1,000 years of ritual and tradition. And just as his life was governed by ritual, so too was his food. Deep within the labyrinthine walls of this city, far from the opulent throne rooms and serene gardens, lay another city in its own right, the imperial kitchen. It was not a single room, but a sprawling complex of more than 100 different kitchens, courtyards, and storehouses, all connected by a maze of stone pathways slick with steam and smoke. Here, over 200 chefs and 1,000 more apprentices and servants worked in a state of near-silent, focused intensity. The air itself was a thick, intoxicating symphony of smells. The fiery aroma of Sichuan peppercorns, the sweet, licorice scent of star anise, the earthy perfume of dried mushrooms from Yunnan, the sharp tang of ginger, and the delicate, oceanic fragrance of abalone drying in the sun. Our eyes are not on the master chefs today, with their tall hats and gleaming cleavers that moved with the speed and grace of a hummingbird's wings. Instead, let us find a young boy, no older than 12, named Wei. His head is shaved, and he wears the simple, gray cotton tunic of the lowest kitchen apprentice. He stands in a corner of the vegetable preparation hall, a room so large that a dozen families could live within it. Before him is a mountain. Not a mountain of rock, but a mountain of snow, peas, their green pods bright and vibrant, freshly delivered from the imperial gardens that very morning. Wei's task is a simple one, and one of terrifying importance. He must string the peas. With a small, sharp knife, he must slice off the top and bottom of each pod, and with the same motion, pull away the tough, stringy fiber that runs along its seam. The pod must remain whole, perfect, and unbruised. He has been working since before dawn, and yet the mountain before him seems no smaller. His fingers are sore, and his back aches from bending over the low wooden table. This is not like the quiet, meditative work Ninsen performed in her temple kitchen. The silence here is not one of peace, but of pressure. Every person in this vast culinary machine, from the master chef who designs the emperor's menu to a small boy stringing peas, knows that a single mistake, a burnt dish, an improperly washed vegetable, a single grain of sand in a bowl of rice, could be their last. For the emperor did not simply eat. His meals were an act of cosmic balance. Each dish was designed according to the principles of yin and yang, the 5 elements and the changing seasons. The food was meant to harmonize his body with the universe, to ensure his health, and thus the health and stability of the entire empire. Wei works with a focus so intense that the rest of the bustling hall has faded away. His entire world has become the small green pod in his hand. He sees the tiny, glistening hairs on its skin, the elegant curve of its shape. He feels the satisfying soft snick as his knife slices the tip, and the delicate resistance as he pulls the string away. One pod, perfect. He places it in a large porcelain bowl filled with cool well water. Then he picks up another. He listens to the sounds around him, sounds that have become the music of his life. The rhythmic, hypnotic thump, thump, thump of a dozen cleavers chopping vegetables in perfect unison. The fierce, dragon-like hiss of oil in a hot wok. The gentle bubbling of a massive clay pot of chicken stock that had been simmering for 3 days and 3 nights. The soft, shuffling footsteps of the eunuchs who would soon arrive to inspect every dish, their faces impassive masks that could betray neither pleasure nor displeasure. Today, the pressure is even higher than usual. The emperor is hosting a banquet for a visiting Mongol prince. The menu will consist of 108 separate dishes. Wei has heard the older apprentices whispering about the ingredients that have been arriving for weeks. Bear paws from the northern forests, camel humps from the western deserts, swallows' nests from the southern cliffs, and fish lips from the eastern seas. The entire empire, it seemed, was being brought to the table, a magnificent, edible display of the emperor's power and the vastness of his domain. And Wei's small task, the stringing of these humble snow peas, was a tiny but essential part of that grand display. His peas would be stir-fried for less than a minute with slivers of cured ham and petals of lotus root, a simple dish of freshness and color meant to cleanse the palate between richer, more complex courses. But if even one pea was stringy, if one pod was bruised, the entire balance would be thrown off. The dish would be a failure. He finishes another pod and places it gently in the water. It floats for a moment, a perfect little green boat among hundreds of others. He looks at his work. The bowl of perfect peas is growing. The mountain on the table is, perhaps, just a little bit smaller. He takes a deep breath, the fragrant, chaotic air of the kitchen filling his lungs. He is just a boy, a tiny, insignificant cog in a machine of unimaginable scale. But in his hands he holds perfection. And for the Son of Heaven, nothing less would do. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith, and the stone floors of the kitchen, which had been cool in the morning, were now warm to the touch. Wei's mountain of snow peas was, at last, gone. Before him now sat 3 large porcelain bowls, each one filled to the brim with perfectly strung, vibrant green pods, resting in cool water like a collection of sleeping jade jewels. His back ached and his fingers were stiff, but a quiet feeling of pride warmed his chest. He had done his small part. He had done it perfectly. An overseeing eunuch, a tall, gaunt man with a face that seemed carved from old ivory, inspected his work. He did not speak. He simply scooped a handful of the peas, let them run through his long, slender fingers, and examined them with an intense, unblinking gaze. He then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. For Wei, that nod was more rewarding than a chest full of gold. It meant he had succeeded. It meant he would continue his work. His next task took him to a different part of the kitchen, a place that felt like another world entirely. He left the loud, bustling vegetable hall and entered the domain of the soup masters. Here, the frantic energy of the cleavers and woks was replaced by a slow, patient, and almost reverent calm. The air was thick with a different kind of aroma, not the sharp spice of cooking, but the deep, rich, and complex scent of things that had been simmering for days. It was the smell of long-cooked chicken bones, of dried scallops rehydrating, of ginseng root, and of countless other mysterious herbs and tonics. The only sound was the gentle blup, blup, blup of dozens of enormous clay pots, simmering over beds of white-hot charcoal. This was the kingdom of Master Chef Po. Po was an old man, so old that some whispered he had cooked for the emperor's grandfather. He was small and round, with a wispy white beard that reached his chest, and his eyes, though clouded with age, held a deep and gentle wisdom. He moved not with the quickness of the other chefs, but with a slow, deliberate grace, as if he were tending a garden rather than a kitchen. It was said that Master Po did not cook with his hands, but with his spirit. Wei bowed low before the old master, his heart fluttering with a mixture of fear and awe. Master Po was a legend. To be chosen to assist him, even in the smallest way, was a great honor. Master Po looked at Wei and smiled, a rare sight in the imperial kitchen. "Ah, the boy with the patient fingers," he said, his voice a soft, reedy whisper. "The peas were good. Very good. Now, let us see how you handle something a bit more delicate." He led Wei to a table where several small wooden boxes were laid out. He opened one. Inside, nestled on a bed of red silk, were what looked like small, dried, translucent cups, woven from 1,000 tiny threads. They were almost weightless. "Swallows' nests," Master Po said, his voice full of reverence. "A gift from the southern sea cliffs. They are not made of twigs, little one. They are made from the swallow's own saliva. It is a pure essence, a piece of the bird's own life force, its kei." Wei's task was to prepare these nests for the emperor's tonic soup. He sat on a small stool with a bowl of warm water and a pair of silver tweezers. Master Po showed him how to soak the nests until they softened and swelled, becoming gelatinous and web-like. Then, with the patience of a saint, Wei had to pick out any microscopic impurities, a stray feather, a speck of dust, without tearing the delicate structure. It was a task that made stringing peas seem clumsy and rushed by comparison. As Wei worked, his entire being focused on the tiny threads in the bowl, Master Po spoke to him in his soft, whispering voice. "You see, little Wei," the old chef murmured, ladling a perfectly clear, golden broth from one of the giant pots. "Anyone with a hot fire can make food taste of spice and salt. But that is the lowest form of cooking. True cooking, the food of the emperor, is about something else. It is not about what we add, but about what we release. Every ingredient, a grain of rice, a leaf of cabbage, a swallow's nest, has its own spirit, its own life force. Our job is not to cover it up, but to gently coax it out, to allow it to express itself in the purest way. He held up a ladle of the golden broth for Wei to see. It was so clear you could see the bottom of the white porcelain ladle, yet the aroma that rose from it was so profoundly rich and complex it made Wei's head spin. "This is Gao Tang," said Master Po. "Superior stock. We have been simmering it for 4 days. We use an old hen, the finest pork and cured ham from Jinhua. We simmer it so slowly for so long that all of their essence, all of their qi, has left the meat and entered the water. The meat itself we will give to the servants. It is worthless now. All of its goodness is here." He gestured to the clear liquid. "This broth can give the emperor strength, can clarify his mind, can grant him a long and peaceful life. It is not soup, it is medicine, it is magic." Wei looked from the impossibly precious nests in his bowl to the impossibly clear broth in the ladle. He was beginning to understand. The food here wasn't just about flavor. It was about a philosophy. It was about balance, purity, and the hidden energies that flowed through all living things. The fierce fire of the woks was yang. The slow, gentle simmering of these pots was yin, and both were needed to create the perfect harmony fit for the Son of Heaven. He finished cleaning one nest, a perfect translucent jewel, and placed it on a clean silk cloth. He felt a calmness settle over him, a sense of purpose that went deeper than just following orders. He was no longer just a kitchen boy. He was a guardian of essences, a tender of secrets. He was a small part of Master Po's gentle magic. He looked into the giant pot of simmering Gao Tang, its surface as still and reflective as a forest pool, and saw his own young, serious face looking back. And for a moment, he felt the 1,000 secrets of that pot, and of this ancient, magnificent kitchen seeping into his very soul. As twilight began to paint the sky outside in shades of lavender and rose, a new energy, a palpable current of electricity, began to flow through the imperial kitchen. The slow, patient work of preparation was over. The time for the final, fiery, and flawless execution had arrived. The gentle simmering of Master Po's soup pots was now just a soft background hum to a storm of controlled and beautiful chaos. The wok chefs, their faces gleaming with sweat in the intense heat of their stations, began their explosive dance. Flames, great orange tongues of them, leaped from the stoves, roaring as they licked the seasoned black iron of the woks. With flicks of the wrist that were too fast for the eye to truly follow, they tossed ingredients into the air. The vibrant green snow peas Wei had so carefully prepared, slivers of iridescent abalone, tender shoots of bamboo. The sound was a deafening yet rhythmic symphony. The fierce sizzle of oil, the sharp clatter of metal ladles against the woks, the sharp, percussive reports of the master chefs calling out their orders in a clipped, coded language all their own. At the same time, in the calmer pastry and dim sum kitchens, chefs were working with the delicate precision of sculptors. They pleated dumplings into the shape of rabbits, carved radishes into soaring phoenixes, and molded sweet rice flour into perfect, shimmering replicas of lychee fruits. Every dish was not just food, it was a work of art, a Miniature Landscape, a poem composed of flavor, color, and form. Wei, his own delicate tasks now complete, was assigned a new duty: to stand by the pass, the long stone counter where finished dishes were placed before being taken to the banquet hall. His job was simply to be invisible, to be ready to wipe away a single stray drop of sauce from a porcelain plate with a silk cloth, to ensure that every single item that left the kitchen was the embodiment of absolute perfection. It was a position of immense trust, and it allowed him to witness the grand finale. One by one, the 108 dishes began to arrive at the pass, a breathtaking river of culinary masterpieces. There were platters of glistening, lacquered duck, its skin roasted to a perfect mahogany crisp. There were bowls of shark fin soup, the precious fins suspended in a shimmering golden broth. There were mountains of gleaming stir-fried prawns and delicate pagodas constructed from crispy taro root. Then a dish arrived that made Wei hold his breath. It came from Master Po's station. In a simple, elegant porcelain bowl sat the superior stock, the gao tang that Wei had seen earlier. It was as clear and still as a perfect piece of amber. But floating in its center was a miracle. It looked like a white chrysanthemum, its hundreds of delicate, feathery petals swaying gently in the clear broth. Wei knew what it was. It was a single block of silken tofu, which a master chef had, with 1,000 impossibly precise cuts from a cleaver, transformed into this blooming flower without it ever breaking apart. It was a dish that was more about skill than flavor, a testament to a lifetime of discipline and artistry. The broth it floated in was the very one that held the essence of the swallow's nests he had so carefully cleaned. As this dish was placed on the pass, a hush fell over the nearby area. A procession of palace eunuchs, clad in flowing robes of deep blue silk, glided into the kitchen. They moved with a supernatural grace, their slippered feet making no sound on the stone floor. They were the bridge between the hot, chaotic human world of the kitchen and the cool, serene, divine world of the emperor's banquet hall. Their faces were serene and emotionless. They formed a line, and the dishes were passed to them one by one. It was like watching a sacred ceremony. Wei watched, his heart pounding, as a eunuch with long pale hands lifted the bowl with the chrysanthemum tofu. The eunuch held it with the reverence one might reserve for a holy relic. He and the others then turned in unison and glided out of the kitchen through a tall, red lacquered door. Wei could only catch a glimpse of the world beyond before the doors swung shut. He saw a long corridor, hung with silk lanterns that cast a soft, warm glow. He heard the faint, ethereal sound of a guzheng, a Chinese zither, its music like the sound of a mountain stream, and he smelled a different scent, the fragrance of orchids and sandalwood incense, the perfume of the celestial world the emperor inhabited. Then the doors closed, and the sounds and smells were gone. The kitchen, though still busy with the preparation of the remaining courses, felt suddenly different. It was as if the audience had left the theater, leaving only the actors backstage. Their work, their sweat, their intense focus, all of it was for a performance they themselves would never get to see. They would never know if the Mongol prince marveled at the tofu flower, or if the emperor noticed the perfect clarity of the broth. Their reward was not praise or applause, but the simple, profound knowledge that they had done their part in upholding the perfect order of the cosmos, an order that flowed from the heavens through the Son of Heaven and down into a single perfect bowl of soup. Wei stood by the pass, his silk cloth in hand, and stared at the red doors. He pictured the bowl traveling down that silent, lantern-lit hallway. He imagined it being placed on the imperial yellow tablecloth amidst the jade chopsticks and golden spoons. He tried to imagine the taste of it, the feel of the 1,000 silken strands of tofu dissolving on the tongue. But he could not. It was a world beyond his knowing. It was food for a god, not for a boy. And his part in its creation was a secret, a story known only to the steam, the fire, and the silent, watchful kitchen gods. The hours that followed were a blur of motion. Dish after dish, course after course, made its silent, ceremonial journey from the heat of the kitchen to the celestial calm of the banquet hall. Wei stood his post, watching the river of culinary art flow past him, a silent, humble gatekeeper between the two worlds. He saw dishes he could not have imagined in his wildest dreams. Glistening sea cucumbers braised with winter mushrooms, delicate pastries steamed inside hollowed-out melons, and a whole roasted piglet, its skin as thin and crackly as glass. Then, as slowly as the tide of a great sea, the flow began to reverse. The eunuchs returned, their faces still impassive, but now they carried empty platters. Some were wiped clean, a sign of the highest imperial favor. Others returned with food barely touched, a silent, terrifying judgment that would be whispered about in the kitchens for weeks. Finally, the last dish was sent out, a simple, cooling almond jelly, and the last empty plate returned. The great, red-lacquered doors swung shut for the final time. The banquet was over. A collective sigh, a great unheard exhalation of breath, seemed to pass through the entire kitchen staff. The tension that had held them all in its grip for days, a wire pulled taut to the breaking point, finally went slack. The master chefs leaned against their stations, their starched hats wilting in the steamy air. The wok masters quenched their roaring fires, and the resulting hiss of steam felt like the kitchen itself sighing in relief. The deafening symphony of the banquet's preparation faded into the soft, clattering sounds of cleaning. The magnificent, artful food was gone, but the aftermath remained. Mountains of greasy pots, stacks of stained plates, and floors that needed to be scrubbed. Wei's final duty of the long night was to help clean Master Po's station. It was a quiet, methodical task. He carefully washed the delicate porcelain bowls and the silver tweezers he had used on the swallows' nests. He helped to ladle the remaining, now cool, superior stock into clay jars for storage. It was still a precious substance, but its moment of glory had passed. As they worked, a different smell began to permeate the air. It was not the complex fragrance of the imperial banquet, but something far simpler, far more humble. It was the clean, starchy, and deeply comforting smell of plain rice congee bubbling away in a small pot in the corner. When the last of the giant soup cauldrons had been scrubbed clean and turned upside down to dry, Master Po beckoned to Wei. The old chef's face was etched with fatigue, but his eyes were kind. He led Wei to a small, worn wooden table at the back of the now quiet soup kitchen. A few other apprentices were already there, their faces smudged with soot and weariness. Master Po took a few simple earthenware bowls and ladled out the steaming congee. It was a plain, milky white, with nothing in it but the rice and the water it was cooked in. He placed a small dish of salty, pickled radish in the center of the table. "Come, little Wei," Master Po said, his voice soft. "You have fed the Son of Heaven. Now you must feed yourself." Wei took the bowl. It was warm, and the heat seeped gratefully into his cold, tired hands. He picked up his chopsticks and took his first mouthful. It was simple, it was plain, and it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. The congee was warm and soothing, coating his stomach with a gentle heat. The sharp, salty crunch of the pickled radish was a perfect counterpoint to the soft rice. There was no artifice, no hidden meanings, no cosmic balance to consider. It was just food, honest, simple, and nourishing. He looked at Master Po, who was eating with his eyes closed, a look of serene contentment on his face. The old man seemed to feel Wei's gaze and opened his eyes. "The 108 dishes of the banquet," he whispered, gesturing with his chopsticks, "are for the spirit. They are a performance. They are a statement of power and of prayer for the harmony of the empire. They are meant to be looked at, to be marveled at, to be understood. They feed the mind." He then tapped his own simple bowl. "This," he said, "is for the body. It is for the weary bones and the hungry belly. It does not need to be understood. It only needs to be eaten. One is a poem. The other is a warm blanket. Both are necessary in this life." Wei understood. He ate his congee in grateful silence, sitting amongst his fellow workers, the heroes of a battle that no one would ever see. They were united not by the glory of the emperor's feast, but by the simple shared comfort of this humble meal. This, he thought, was the true taste of the kitchen. When his bowl was empty, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, the kind that feels like a heavy, welcome cloak, settled over him. He bowed low to Master Po, his heart full of a quiet, unspoken gratitude, and made his way out of the kitchens and towards the Spartan dormitories where the apprentices slept. His room was just a small cell with a hard wooden pallet and a single thin blanket. But tonight, it felt like a palace. He did not even bother to undress. He simply lay down, and the moment his head touched the wooden pillow, the world dissolved. The sights, the smells, the pressures of the day, the green peas, the golden broth, the chrysanthemum of tofu, the silent eunuchs, the roaring fires, all of it faded away. His last waking thought was of the simple, clean taste of the rice in his belly. And just like Ninsun in her temple 1,000 miles and 1,000 years away, Wei, the boy with the patient fingers, fell into a profound and dreamless sleep. The deep, honest sleep of the kitchen boy, Wei, releases his dreaming spirit back into the great river of time. The dream flows on, leaving the world of silk and secrets behind. It travels westward, over the steppes, past the Black Sea, until it smells the sharp, clean, salty tang of a new body of water. This is the Adriatic, a sea as blue and brilliant as a shard of fallen sky, nestled between the boot of Italy and a rugged, wild coastline of jagged limestone cliffs and 1,000 hidden islands. Here, in a time long before Wei's emperor and even a few generations after Ninsun's temple, our final story awaits. There are no grand cities here, no towering ziggurats or sprawling palaces. The land is harsh and beautiful, but unforgiving. The stony soil offers up little more than olives and tough grapes, not enough to feed a proud and fiercely independent people. And so, these people, the Illyrians, turned their faces not to the earth, but to the sea. The sea was their field, their highway, and their hunting ground. and they became the most skilled and feared sailors of this turbulent water. To the wealthy merchants of the Greek city-states and the rising power of Rome, they were pirates. But to themselves, they were simply the wolves of the sea, taking what they needed to survive, living by their own rules in a world of greedy empires. Let us find a young woman named Lyra. She is perhaps 17, with hair the color of dark honey, braided with shells and leather cords to keep it from whipping in the wind. Her skin is tanned and weathered by the sun and the salt spray, and her hands are strong and calloused, not from grinding grain or weaving cloth, but from hauling ropes and handling an oar. She wears a simple woolen tunic and leather trousers, practical clothes for a life lived on the deck of a ship. She is not in a temple or a kitchen. She is in her truest home, a ship. But this is not a lumbering merchant vessel, heavy with grain or wine. This is a lembus, an Illyrian warship, and it is a thing of lethal beauty. It is long, narrow, and low to the water, built for speed and surprise, not for comfort. Its hull is carved from the dark, strong wood of the black pine, its single mast designed to be raised and lowered in moments. It is propelled by 50 oarsmen, whose rhythmic strokes can make the ship skim across the waves like a dragonfly. It is the perfect weapon for this coastline of hidden coves and treacherous shallows. Lyra's ship, the Sea Viper, is at rest now, anchored in a cove so perfectly hidden that you could sail past its mouth a dozen times and never know it was there. The sheer limestone cliffs rise on 3 sides, protecting it from the wind and from prying eyes. The water in the cove is a calm, translucent turquoise, and the setting sun is turning the white cliffs to a warm, rosy pink. The sounds here are the sounds of the wild sea, the gentle lapping of water against the hull, the mournful, lonely cry of a gull circling overhead, and the soft whisper of the wind through the tough grasses that cling to the cliff tops. The crew, a hardened group of men and Lyra's own father, the captain, are resting on the small rocky beach. The smoke from their cooking fire, where a freshly caught fish is roasting, drifts lazily upwards. They have had a successful raid. A fat Roman merchant ship, clumsy and slow, was relieved of its cargo of fine pottery and several amphorae of expensive Spanish wine just yesterday. Now was a time for rest, for repairing gear, and for enjoying the spoils. Lyra is sitting on the prow of the Sea Viper, her legs dangling just above the water. She is not idle. She holds a coil of thick rope, and with a small sharp knife, she is painstakingly checking every inch of it, picking out any small phrase or weaknesses. A ship is a collection of 1,000 small essential things, and a single weak rope at the wrong moment could mean disaster. Her life and the lives of her crew depended on this kind of patient attention. This was her ritual, her prayer, not to a distant goddess in a statue, but to the ship itself, this living creature of wood and rope that was her shield and her sword. She knew its every groan and creak, the way it listed in a heavy swell, the way it seemed to sing when it caught a strong tailwind. It was more a part of her than the rocky land of her birth. As she works, her gaze drifts out towards the mouth of the cove, to the open sea beyond. The Adriatic is calm tonight, its surface a vast, glittering sheet of silver and gold under the setting sun. She feels its pull, the constant, restless call to adventure. She loves this life, its fierce, wild freedom. She loves the thrill of the chase, The rush of the wind in the sail, the feeling of the deck rising and falling beneath her feet like the chest of a sleeping giant. She loves the nights spent under a blanket of stars so clear and close you felt you could reach out and touch them. Of course, she knew the dangers. The sudden, violent storms that could turn the sea from a friend to a monster in minutes. The ever-present threat of Roman war galleys, larger and more heavily armed than their own swift ships. She had seen friends lost to the waves, and she had fought in skirmishes where the flash of bronze and the cry of men filled the air. This life was a knife's edge, but it was life. It was real. It was not a life spent walled in, praying to silent gods or toiling in a hot, steamy kitchen for a ruler she would never see. Her fate was her own, tied to the wind, the waves, and the strength of her own arms. The last of the sun's fire fades from the cliffs, and the sky begins to deepen into the familiar indigo of evening. The first star appears, a sharp diamond bright point of light. Lyra pauses in her work, her knife and rope resting in her lap. She looks at the star, not with the reverence of a priestess, but with the practical eye of a navigator. It is the North Star, the unmoving point in the turning heavens, her steadfast guide. It tells her where she is and where she can go. A breeze, cool and smelling of the deep sea, blows a strand of hair across her face. She smiles. The fish on the beach will be cooked now. There will be wine and stories told around the fire. And tomorrow, or the day after, they will raise their sail and pull on their oars, and the sea viper will once again slide out of its hidden sanctuary, ready to hunt, ready to live, ready to write its own story upon the vast, open pages of the sea. The fire on the beach crackled and spat, sending a column of orange sparks dancing up into the deep indigo sky. It pushed back the darkness, creating a warm, flickering circle of light on the pale sand. The crew of the Sea Viper were gathered around it, their weathered faces illuminated by the flames. The smell of roasted fish, seasoned simply with sea salt and wild herbs, mingled with the sharp, unfamiliar aroma of the captured Roman wine, which they drank from rough clay cups. Lyra sat beside her father, Draco, the captain of the ship. He was a broad, powerful man with a thick beard salted with gray and eyes the color of the sea in a storm. He was a man of few words on the deck of his ship, where his commands were sharp and precise, but here, by the fire, with a full belly and a cup of wine, he became a storyteller. The crew fell silent as he stared into the flames, his gaze distant, and began to speak. His voice was a low, rough rumble like stones rolling in the surf. "This wine," he began, swirling the dark red liquid in his cup. "It tastes of dust and sunlight. It tastes of a land where everything is ordered. The Romans, they plant their vines in straight lines. Their roads are straight. Their minds are straight. They think the whole world should be as neat and predictable as one of their vineyards." A few of the men chuckled into their beards. "They send us messages in their straight-lined writing," Draco continued, his voice laced with scorn. "They send their politicians in their clean white togas, men who smell of city perfumes and have never tasted salt spray. And they tell us we must stop. They call us pirates. They say the sea must be safe for their merchants to grow even fatter." He took a long drink of the wine, then set his cup down hard on the sand. "We met one of their envoys once, a prattling fool with soft hands. He told us that it is the law of Rome that the sea belongs to everyone. and that to take from a ship is a crime against their state. Draco looked around the fire at his crew, his stormy eyes flashing in the firelight. I told him that the sea belongs only to itself, and to those strong enough to master it. The fish does not ask the worm's permission before it eats. The wolf does not ask the sheep for a treaty. This is the law of the sea. It is the law of the mountains. It is the only law we have ever needed. A low murmur of agreement went around the circle. These were the words they lived by, the truth that was etched into their bones. But our queen, Draco said, and his voice changed, the scorn replaced by a deep, rumbling pride. Our Queen Tuta, she knows how to speak to these Romans. He smiled, a fierce, wolfish grin. When their envoys came to her, demanding she put a stop to our raids, she laughed. She looked at them with the eyes of a hawk and told them that it was not the custom of Illyrian rulers to forbid their subjects from taking their living from the sea. She told them that what they called piracy, we called enterprise. Our ships, our strength, our courage, these are our fields and our plows. The sea is our harvest. Lyra listened, her chin resting on her knees. She had heard this story and others like it 100 times, but every time it stirred something fierce and proud in her blood. She pictured Queen Tuta, tall and brave, facing down the arrogant Roman ambassadors, her words as sharp and swift as the prow of the sea viper itself. Tuta was more than a queen to them. She was the living spirit of their people, the embodiment of their untamable freedom. Draco's voice grew softer, more contemplative as he stared deep into the shifting embers of the fire. But the Romans, they do not understand such words. They do not understand our spirit. They only understand strength. They see our freedom as chaos. They see our pride as an insult. They are a storm gathering on the horizon, a great, slow-moving storm that thinks it can flatten every wave and tame every wind. The joyful, boisterous mood from the beginning of the meal had quieted. The men now stared into the fire along with their captain, their faces thoughtful. They all knew the truth of his words. Their swift ships were perfect for raiding clumsy merchant vessels, but they had all heard tales of the Roman navy. They had heard of their massive quincarames, floating fortresses with hundreds of legionaries, and of the corvus, the brutal boarding bridge that could turn a sea battle into a land battle. They were wolves, yes, but Rome was an army of lions. Lyra looked from the fire to the mouth of the cove. The sea outside was a black, inscrutable void, indistinguishable from the star-dusted sky above it. Out there, in that darkness, the world was changing. The old ways, the ways of the sea wolves, were being challenged. The stories her father told were tales of pride and defiance. But she could hear the undercurrent of worry, a faint, sad note beneath the brave words. She felt a sudden, fierce love for her people, for this hard and beautiful life. She would fight for it. She would fight alongside her father, for her queen, and for every hidden cove and rocky island of her homeland. She was a daughter of the sea, and she would not be tamed by men who only understood the dirt of their vineyards. The fire burned low, the flames sinking into a bed of glowing red embers. The men began to roll themselves in their thick woolen cloaks, finding comfortable spots on the sand to sleep. The stories were over for tonight. Lyra lay down, her head pillowed on a coil of rope, and looked up at the vast, silent river of stars. The storm was coming. She knew it, But tonight they were safe. Tonight they were free. And as the gentle sound of the waves on the shore became her lullaby, that was enough. Lyra's last waking sense was the rhythmic whisper of the waves washing onto the shore. Shh, shh, shh. It was the sea's own lullaby, a sound as ancient and as constant as the stars above her. The cool night air felt like a soft blanket on her skin, and the hard sand and coiled rope beneath her felt as comfortable as the finest feather bed. The fire was now just a collection of winking red embers, and the breathing of the sleeping crewmen around her was a deep and steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the soft music of the waves. She closed her eyes, and the wild, free world of Illyria dissolved into the even wilder, freer world of her dreams. She did not dream of battle, nor of treasure. She dreamt she was a seagull. She felt the wind lift her wings, a powerful, invisible current that carried her effortlessly up, up, up into the moonlit sky. Below her, the sea was a vast, wrinkled sheet of silver, and the hundreds of islands were like dark stepping stones scattered by a giant's hand. There were no borders here, no Roman laws or Illyrian customs. There was only the wind, the water, and the glorious boundless freedom of the sky. She swooped and soared, her lonely, joyful cry echoing over the silent waves, a pure expression of her untamed spirit. And as the seagull flies farther and farther out over the dark water, let us watch as her dream, a beautiful, wild thing, gently detaches itself and flows into the great, invisible river that connects all sleeping souls. It is the same river that flows at this very moment through a small Spartan dormitory in the heart of a vast and silent forbidden city. There, a young boy named Wei sleeps the profound, dreamless sleep of the utterly exhausted. His fingers, which so patiently strung the peas and cleaned the swallows' nests, are finally relaxed. His mind, which bore the immense pressure of the imperial banquet, is now quiet and still. Perhaps, if he is dreaming at all, he dreams only of the simple, comforting warmth of a bowl of plain rice congee, a dream of humble nourishment and of a job well done. And the river flows on, not just across space but back through the deep corridors of time itself. It flows into a great hall in a sun-baked temple in the land between two rivers. A young priestess named Ninsun lies on her reed mat, surrounded by the soft, rhythmic breathing of her sisters. Her day of ritual, of reading, of weaving is over. Her soul, which contemplated the vastness of the cosmos from a moonlit rooftop, is now at perfect peace. And her dreams are of cool, life-giving water, of a simple clay vessel being filled to the brim by a patient, ancient river, a priestess in her sacred garden, a kitchen boy in his silent palace, a pirate girl on her wild shore. 3 lives, so different, lived in worlds that could never have known one another. One's life was a circle of ritual dedicated to the gods. Another's was a straight line of intense pressure dedicated to an emperor. The third's was a zigzag of freedom and danger dedicated to the sea. And yet, look closer. See how they are all the same. See the young woman finding peace in her place within a vast, cosmic order. See the young boy finding pride and belonging in his small, essential role. See the girl finding joy and identity in her connection to the wild world around her. Each one, at the end of their long day, sought and found a quiet place of safety. Each one felt the comfort of community, whether it was a sisterhood of priestesses, a brotherhood of chefs, or a crew of loyal shipmates. And each one, in their own time, in their own way, finally surrendered to the universal healing embrace of sleep. And now, my dear friend, that same great river of dreams has reached you. It flows quietly into your room, its currents filled with the whispers of ancient prayers, the scent of phantom spices, and the faint, salty tang of a long-forgotten sea. All the stories have been told. All the work is done. All that is left is to let go. Feel the river gently lifting you now. Let its calm, steady current support you. You are not just one person listening in the dark. You are a part of this long, unbroken chain of dreamers, stretching back to the very dawn of time. Their peace is now your peace. Their rest is now your rest. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to go. Simply float now, drift on the great, silent river of dreams. Good night. Sleep well.